So all the investors who came in at that time, all the multinational investors, they actually burned their fingers a fair bit. A lot of them lost all their money. Some of the projects never even got completed.
Some continue to be stuck even today.
Some continue to be stuck even today, and we looked at a fair deal of these investments back in the days. Thankfully, Blackstone, at least where I was, they kind of completely steered away from this sort of an investing, and that is the whole reason why they did so well.
So the rule in law as far as India is concerned is it's again based on a rule called Nemo Dat rule.
Okay.
It's a Latin rule which basically means that you can't give a better title than what you have. Title certificates started to be issued by lawyers for apartment projects, for lenders, etc. There are rulings by courts, and one significant ruling on this accord is the judgment of the Bombay High Court in this case called Ramniklal Tulsidas Kotak, where the court has laid down certain steps that anybody who is issuing a title certificate and verifying title to real property needs to do. To build a defense in law, which is essentially bona fide purchaser without notice and valuable consideration. When you're able to establish that you are a bona fide purchaser, you've paid value for what you have purchased, and you've never had notice of any other contrary claims, the law affords you certain protections.
Right. Our strategy has always been to buy completed projects, right? So when you do a completed project versus a greenfield, clearly the risks are reduced to a great extent because you are talking about a building which already has OC.
Absolutely.
And the industry has learned this the hard way. In 2007-8 when we started investing in India, it was all greenfield investing. There's firstly not enough stock available, and the FDI regulations at that time didn't allow you to buy a completed building.
No, and like you rightly said, it also depends on who you partnered with. Wherever you've partnered with the right people, those people have made dividends.
Legal and title diligence is one of the most important aspects of any real estate investment decision that is made. And it's especially true in India because Indian land laws are complicated. Sometimes they are extremely different in different parts of the same city. We have different bodies looking at different locations in the same city sometimes. State laws are different, central laws are different. And compared to the West, where it's much cleaner, India has still remained quite complicated and difficult when it comes to title and real estate diligence on the legal side. Any real estate investor in India, whether it's Blackstone or the smallest of real estate investors, do or should be doing legal and title diligence on the property because it's something that tells you how good the chain of ownership is in a property and how clear the titles are in the property. So today, in this episode of the podcast, we're going to look at the legal side of the business of how legal diligence impacts real estate investment decision making. And we have with us today Mridul Kumbalath. Thank you so much, Mridul, for joining us. Mridul is a veteran in the real estate diligence and legal industry. He's been doing this for many, many years, and we go back a long way. We've worked together when I was at Blackstone. Met him very early, doing one of the early deals in Mumbai when he used to be in Mumbai at the time. And then more recently, of course, all our diligences have been done by Mridul first when he was at Amarchand Mangaldas, which became Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, and then more recently in Trilegal. So Mridul, thank you so much for coming and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kunal. Always a pleasure.
Okay, so just going to run past some of the questions that we've typically had investors ask us, on our diligences and on the investments that we've made. And you are the expert here, so please go ahead. The first question is, why do we even need to do diligence? What's so important about legal diligence? Why not just go and buy the property?
Yeah. See, the one-line answer to that is in India, title is not guaranteed by the state.
Right.
The Indian legal system recognizes title based on an adversarial system of determination of title,
Right.
which essentially means that any person who can prove a better title is the owner of the property.
Right.
Which,
and sorry, this is not the case around the world? Is this only like an India thing?
yeah, this is, so what we follow in India is a common law system.
Right.
This used to be the system across the world as well.
Right.
But then there was a system in Australia developed known as the torrent system of title,
Okay.
where which developed as a consequence of digitization of land records, etc.
Right.
Based on which the state itself was able to guarantee title.
I see.
Which means that once your name gets registered in the land registry in these jurisdictions where they follow the torrent system of title, title is indefeasible.
I see.
Which unfortunately is not the case in India.
Okay. Okay.
Some of the jurisdictions that do follow it are Singapore,
Okay.
UK,
Okay.
so New Zealand.
Okay.
So they all have the system of land registration where once registration is done and your name is reflected, you don't need to go back.
I see. Okay. Okay. So that's the whole reason why we do such, detailed
Correct.
diligence.
So the rule in law as far as India is concerned is it's again based on a rule called Nemo Dat rule.
Okay.
It's a Latin rule which basically means that you can't give a better title than what you have.
Right.
And therefore you need to always be able to establish that what you have is a good title.
Right.
Unless somebody comes up and is able to establish that his title is better than yours.
Right.
So therefore, in India, what we do is we always try to trace the chain of title
Yeah.
to the earliest available known source of title.
Right. 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 That was my next question. How do you, when you say legal diligence, what do you exactly do? I mean, we get a deal done, we sign a term sheet, and then we hand it over to you, and we say, Mridul, now can you just help us look at this title? So when you get that mandate, what are the things that you start doing?
Sure. See, earlier it was not so streamlined in terms of what a legal due diligence in relation to titles involved. It was primarily limited to looking at the sub-registrar offices and looking at the revenue records. But what has happened, given that title certificates started to be issued by lawyers for apartment projects, for lenders, etc., there are rulings by courts, and one significant ruling on this accord is the judgment of the Bombay High Court in this case called Ramniklal Tulsidas Kotak, where the court has laid down certain steps that anybody who is issuing a title certificate and verifying title to real property needs to do.
I see.
So the first step is to look at all your chain title deeds. When I say chain title deeds, that would mean your sale deeds, gift deeds, wills, etc., and trace it back, like I said, to the earliest known available source of title.
Right. And is there like a limit to which you can trace, or you have to keep tracing till you find the final guy?
The thumb rule is 30 years.
Okay.
And that's a minimum.
Okay.
The whole concept of 30 years has also evolved because 30 years essentially is the limitation period prescribed for any claims on title vis-a-vis government property.
Okay.
Similarly, if you're dealing with minors' interest in relation to property, minors, when they are minors, they don't need to be able to claim anything in relation to the property.
Right.
Their claim only fructifies when they become majors. So therefore, you're already looking at 18 years running. So
Right.
once they turn 18, they get 3
12
years.
years. Okay.
3 years. Now, depending on whether they are members of joint family properties or if it's their absolute
Right,
property,
right.
it depends between 3 to 12 years.
So if you've not said that this property belongs to me for 30 years, then your claim is vastly...
To begin with, that is a good step to take, to say that yes, if you are able to establish 30 years long chain of title, to begin with, that is good.
Right.
But like you are aware, and which you actually mentioned initially, titles in India is a complicated set of questions.
Yeah.
Because it is not one law that regulates land titles or real property issues in India.
Yeah.
There are multifarious laws that apply.
Right.
I'll give you a simple example. We are in Karnataka. In Karnataka, there's a legislation called as the PTCL Act, which is essentially to prevent and protect the rights of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes.
Right.
There are no limitations prescribed under that law, and in fact, that is one of the things that the current government has also come up as an assurance to the people, saying that if people have dealt with lands belonging to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, despite however old these trades were done, under this law, it can be reopened, the lands can be confiscated and can be returned to those landlords.
And this is a state law, which
This is a state
specific
law.
to Karnataka. This is what we were talking about. It's just and there are something similar in other states
There
like
are,
Maharashtra.
absolutely. In Maharashtra also, the Maharashtra Land Revenue Code has a separate provision which dealing with lands belonging to scheduled tribes,
Right.
where you require permission from the state government before you're even dealing with such lands.
Right.
Any transfers which are done without such permissions are bad in law.
Okay.
So therefore, when you're doing title verification, 30-year of course is a thumb rule, but depending on the nature of title and as we do the scrutiny of title, many times we may need to necessarily go back beyond 30 years. Again, it depends on what we discover during that investigation process on how the title has
the title has devolved to different people over a
Correct.
period of time. So that's one thing that you do. Look at the chain of ownership and title over the last at least 30 more years.
Yeah.
What else do we do?
The next step that we do is we check something called we do an encumbrance check, which is essentially looking at all the registered transactions that have happened in relation to a particular property in the sub-registrar office.
Right.
The reason why we do that is all transactions, at least most transactions that happen between parties inter se, need to be by way of a registered deed.
Right.
And therefore, once registration happens, that registration acts as a notice to the world at large.
Right.
And that's a principle of law.
Right.
So one of the checks we do as part of the title verification within that 30-year period is also to check if there are any other registered transactions which tell a story on the title to the property which is adverse to what we have found through the review of documents.
Right.
The other step that we do is we cause a public notice.
Okay.
The reason why we do a public notice is many a time all these checks may not be enough to identify if there's a claim, because in India there are several laws that deal with transfers of property.
Right.
I said that most transactions on property need to be by way of registered documents, but there are transfers of property which can be done orally as well.
Right.
So a simple example is a family partition.
Right.
Family partitions in India are historically done orally between family members.
Right.
It is only subsequently, for good order's sake, that people get it documented through a memorandum.
So you never know if something like
You
this
never
has
know
happened.
something. Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. Similarly, wills.
Right.
An example is will.
You did not register
You
a
needn't
will.
register a will.
Yeah.
In which case, if properties have been transferred, unless you get access to that will, you will never know. So one of the steps that we do as part of title verification is also put out a public notice, at least in one English newspaper and the other in a local vernacular daily.
And this is to tell someone who's kind of seen it to say, okay, I've seen this public notice and I have an objection to this transfer taking place. And therefore, he has 14 days or X number of days to come out and tell you that.
That's right.
And therefore, if he doesn't, you have an extra proof to say that, look, we did come out with a public notice, but you didn't say anything at that time.
That's right. See, what you said is absolutely right. The reason why we did do that is to build a defense in law, which is essentially bona fide purchaser without notice and valuable consideration.
Right.
When you're able to establish that you are a bona fide purchaser, you've paid value for what you have purchased, and you never had notice of any other contrary claims, the law affords you certain protections.
Right.
So that tomorrow if I'm dealing with X person and we truly believe X is the owner of the property, but it may be Y, but X has put out the fact that X is the true owner, the law affords you certain protections vis-a-vis the transaction, so long as you have done the trade for true value, you have done all your due diligences.
Right.
Your title to some extent is protected.
Okay. So you got the title check, you got public notices. What about, all of these approvals that we also look at, right? That's also a big portion of legal diligence.
Absolutely. So mostly in developed real estate, approvals becomes pretty crucial. It becomes crucial because nowadays we are not just buying land, we are only buying built up space.
Yeah.
And if those buildings have not been constructed in accordance with law, then you run the risk of demolition, etc.
So if we have to look at the process of building a building, right? You start off with plain land, and then what does the developer need to do after this to finally reach a completion of a building stage? What approvals does he need?
So let's take a greenfield project.
Yeah.
At land stage, the first approval is necessarily that the land has to be converted.
Right.
Because most lands to begin with would be agricultural lands.
Right.
So the lands would need to be converted. So you will have a non-agricultural permission.
Right.
Post that, you will have your development approvals in terms of if the zone, in terms of the master planning of the region, if it permits the land to be constructed for a particular purpose and you want to do some other purpose,
right,
you may need a zone change.
Right.
Once you complete that initial step, you approach the local authority, which may be a municipal corporation or a panchayat, depending on where the
And
property.
who is that in Bangalore?
So in Bangalore, we have the BBMP.
Right. How are they different from BDA?
So BDA is a planning authority.
Okay.
So the master planning of a region is prepared by a planning authority.
Right.
On the other hand, day-to-day approvals for construction development are handled by the local authority,
Okay,
which is your BBMP.
And who gives you the zoning? Who changes the agricultural land?
So the zoning in relation to the property is determined by the master plan, and the master plan is actually prepared by the planning authority in consultation with the government. You would be aware, currently we are still continuing with the 2015 RMP, which should have been replaced by now. There is a proposal and there's a draft plan that has come, but till date it hasn't come to fruition.
So you go to the planning authority and then you go to BBMP to tell him that, look, now we're going to start constructions. I need approval from you for this building that I'm building, and then you submit all the plans, what you're going to build, what will be the floor, how many floors, and all of the, how much setback and so on.
That's right. And as part of this check, even the BBMP, which is the local authority, also insists for certain checks.
Right.
For example, it insists for fire NOCs to be obtained.
Yeah.
It insists for whether water connection, sewage will be handled vis-a-vis the property, how it will be handled. So it asks for a BWSSB NOC.
Right.
Similarly, it asks for a height clearance NOC from the relevant authority.
Right.
There could be an airport authority NOC required, or there could be any other local authority NOCs.
And this is all before you start building?
It's all before you start building.
Okay.
In addition to all of this, there is your environmental regime also that runs parallel with construction development.
Which has become quite strict over the last decade or so.
Absolutely. So ever since the NGT has come into into frame, the environmental regulations in India are being enforced a lot more, which is very good. Even the regulators are becoming more accountable. So the initial watchdog as far as environmental aspects in a construction development project will be a pollution control board. So every state has its own pollution control board. So in Karnataka, we have the Karnataka PCB. So Karnataka PCB also needs to grant something called a consent. It's called a consent to operate. And then you start your project development. Depending on the size of the project, if it exceeds a particular threshold, there is also a requirement to get a Ministry of Environmental clearance before the project starts.
I see. So there's a threshold to go to the central government.
That's right. There's a threshold. So most large projects in Bangalore invariably exceed that threshold. It's about 20,000 square meters. So they will invariably exceed that
any
threshold.
building above 200,000 square feet, you need to go to the Ministry of Environment.
That's right.
I see. Okay. And as far as the height restriction is concerned, is that a local thing, or do you also need to go to the Aviation Authority of India?
So there's the Airports Authority, and there are regulations around this, depending on different zones that have been earmarked. So depending on that, you have to go to the relevant authority.
If you're in the funnel zone of the airport, then you need to go to a particular...
And there would be height restrictions accordingly.
Right. That's why EGL is like a really low height project, right? Because it's just next to the HAL airport and it's right in the funnel zone.
That's right.
Okay. So basically, you go to BBMP and say, look, here are my plans, and then BBMP looks at all this and says, okay, all these are fine. Now here is your consent to start construction.
Building license.
So you start then building. Then once you come from then to completion, do you need to go back to them for anything?
So from time to time, you may need to go back depending on if you're making any alterations. Because invariably in every project, you may not conceptualize the full project on day one. You may need to start the project. But as the project evolves and maybe before it reaches the plinth stage, you may have decided to add on more floors, etc. So long as the other infrastructural capabilities are there vis-a-vis the project, you are permitted to do that.
Right.
So there could be amendments that happen in relation to the plan sanction.
Right.
And apart from that, the local regulator does inspections from time to time.
Okay, just to make sure that you're doing what you were supposed to be doing.
That's right.
Okay, and then once, let's say you do everything, you finish, the building is up, then do you need any more approvals?
Then you require an approval called the occupation certificate.
Right.
That occupation certificate essentially is issued once the building is fully completed.
Okay.
The architect of the building issues a notice to the local authority confirming that it has been constructed in accordance with the plan.
Okay.
They come and do an inspection.
Okay.
They see if there is any deviation.
Right.
To the extent of a particular percentage, deviations are allowed in Bangalore.
Okay.
And if there are those deviations, there's a compounding charge that is applied,
Okay.
and then an occupation certificate is issued.
Right.
Now, once an occupation certificate is issued, in parallel, there is also a requirement of getting a fire NOC now
Right, of course.
in Karnataka. And that is typically renewed every 2 years.
Right.
And that is a separate department of the fire brigade itself which issues it.
Basically, they want to come and see whether you've left enough space for the trucks to come in case there is a fire, and there's places for people to exit, and so on and so forth. Right? That's why you need that particular fire NOC.
And typically, the OC will also, occupation certificate will also come only once that inspection happens.
Right.
So you would have the fire clearance, and then you would proceed for an occupation certificate.
Okay.
Apart from that, like I mentioned, the environmental angle is also there.
Right.
So once a building is completed, you need something called a consent to operate as well.
Okay.
And that approval again needs to come from the Pollution Control Board.
Okay.
I mentioned that depending on sizes of project, there could be an environmental approval required from the ministry as well.
Right.
In those cases, there are continuing obligations vis-a-vis these projects to give 6 monthly reporting in terms of whether they continue to remain compliant with all the several environmental safeguards that have been committed vis-a-vis the project when that approval was taken.
Right. So, but if you got the OC and the fire NOC in place, then you are more or less kind of assured that the guy is stuck to what he was supposed to have done.
That's a fair assumption.
Right. So when you buy, our strategy has always been to buy completed projects, right? So when you do a completed project versus a greenfield, clearly the risks are reduced to a great extent because you are talking about a building which already has OC.
Absolutely.
And therefore it must have done all the other things that he should have done before. Whereas if you are entering, let's say, at a land stage, then you are taking a risk that the guy might build more, or he might deviate from the plans, and then later the authority might come and raise the building or do something.
So there are two things here. One is, of course, the project risk that you rightly laid out. The other risk is also from a legal standpoint.
Right.
Most projects that you're also aware of this, they run into legal turmoils at the greenfield stage when they're just breaking ground.
Yes.
There could be claims from third parties saying that we did not know, but now since activity has happened on site, we know that somebody else is in occupation.
Yeah.
In law, unfortunately, the limitation is based on knowledge.
Right.
And therefore, they're always able to prove that this has come to my notice only when hands changed and on site different activities started.
Right.
So that is when claims start. When you're dealing with a completed project, more or less, you know whatever claims are there. If there are any disputes or not, those would have all come to the fore.
Right.
So that is a big advantage when you're dealing with completed assets.
And the industry has learned this the hard way. In 2007-8 when we started investing in India, it was all greenfield investing. There's firstly not enough stock available, and the FDI regulations at that time didn't allow you to buy a completed building. You couldn't. There was no business center. There's nothing like that allowed you. You could only invest in a particular kind of project, which was mostly greenfield.
Right.
550,000 square feet and more, minimum lock-in of 3 years, and so on and so forth. So that it was heavily in favor of developers. So all the investors who came in at that time, all the multinational investors, they actually burned their fingers a fair bit. A lot of them lost all their money. Some of the projects never even got completed.
Some continue to be stuck even today.
Some continue to be stuck even today. And we looked at a fair, deal of these investments back in the days. Thankfully, Blackstone, at least where I was, they kind of completely steered away from this sort of an investing, and that is the whole reason why they did so well. From 7 to 10, when everyone else was buying, land, I even remember this Four Seasons project at that time was Whitehall and the developer, and there was just land there. And we said at the time, look, this appears to be quite complicated, and that's not what we've been doing in the West. So let's just wait for completed stuff. And I think that is something that they did really well, and that's something that bore really good dividends for them in the future. You know, buying golf lanes, Manyata, all completed buildings.
No, and like you rightly said, it also depends on who you partnered with.
Yeah.
Wherever you've partnered with the right people, those people have made dividends.
Right.
Those projects have taken off.
Right.
So most institutional investors, even today, who have actually been able to make it big in the market, they actually chose the right partners.
Right. Right.
So that was also a crucial role in ensuring their success stories at least.
Yeah. Let's talk about one more technical aspect before we move on, which is the litigation search, right? Which is also part of this diligence process. What exactly is litigation search, and what are you looking for when you are doing a litigation search?
So the rule in law is that if there are litigations which are pending vis-a-vis a property, even if you do any transfers in relation to the property, your title will always remain subject to the outcome of that litigation.
Right.
So therefore, in a title verification process, it becomes crucial to know whether there are litigations or not.
Right.
Because if there's a litigation, no matter how much of a diligence that you've done, your title will be ultimately subject to the outcome of that litigation.
Right.
Unfortunately, court records in India are not categorized based on immovable property.
Right.
They're always categorized based on the name of parties.
Right.
So doing a conclusive check of property litigations is very difficult.
Right.
One aspect here I would like to flag off is in Maharashtra, interestingly, there's a separate register that is maintained called the List Pendants Register with the Sub-Registrar Office, where if there are actual litigations which are there is a requirement that you go and register with the Sub-Registrar. That way, people who are dealing with that land immediately come to know of it.
Right.
Not that if you don't register, the litigation will not still continue to have a bearing, but there is a facilitative mechanism that has been developed by the state to ensure people get notice.
Right.
So what we do as a process in our title scrutinies, given that litigation is pretty crucial, is one check is of course to ask the counterparty, because he knows best whether there is a litigation or not. Either he would have been served with a notice, or at least on the property there would be a notice served.
Right.
The second check that we do is we check the databases.
Right.
For this now there are several new startups that have come up with softwares which allow you to do a check of all the online databases.
And by name of the company which owns it, or just by property name as well?
By name of the company.
Oh, that's
Again,
nice.
because that remains a lacunae.
Right.
There is no way of checking based on property.
Right.
So we need to do a check based on the current owner.
Right.
So if there is any litigation which is there in the name of the current owner, that throws up.
Right.
Again, it is not foolproof, because it also depends on how the relevant clerk at the court fed in the name.
Right.
If there's a spelling mistake, it will not show.
Right. Right.
So what these search engines do, they do a combination of the names.
Okay.
So that way they are able to rule out the risk of missing out on relevant litigations.
Okay.
So in all your deals at least, we have always insisted that we do a litigation check.
Search, right.
And invariably, whatever litigation checks come and whatever results come, thereafter we do a scrutiny of each of them to rule out that nothing affects the property.
Okay. Now you do different kinds of diligences, right? One is you do for title and land, and you look at a lot of leases as well. I know that. So how is diligence for a lease different from when you're buying? Is it different, or is it exactly the same?
Very different.
Right.
Very different, because the risk appetites are entirely different.
Yeah. In one you're a tenant, in one you are putting your money behind the property.
That's right. In one you are a tenant, you still have somebody as an owner to catch hold of if something goes wrong.
Right.
On the other hand, you have purchased the property. You never know whether you will be able to pursue the matter vis-a-vis ever again. So those are issues, and therefore that risk appetite is entirely different.
Right.
Given that whenever we are buying property, we do the full-fledged title diligence, which like we discussed, goes back the whole 30 years.
Right.
But when we are looking at a lease, we only do a limited check. We do limited checks in terms of have the revenue records been updated in the name of the current owner of the property, because that is some way an evidence to show that he is the rightful owner.
Right.
The other check that we do is we cite their relevant sale deeds to conclude that these have been duly registered.
Right.
We check the relevant approvals in relation to the premises to confirm that approvals have been issued by the local authorities recognizing the relevant lessor as the owner of the property,
Right.
whether those approvals are in order or not.
Right.
So these are the basic checks we do, and depending on lease tenure also, those risks change. If you're looking at a long-term lease, maybe 15, 20 years, you may go a little more in depth.
More deeper.
But if you're looking at a 5-year lease, you may not do so, because ultimately, no matter the diligence, you're looking to the landlord to safeguard title. So from a landlord standpoint, it becomes crucial to check titles pretty clearly.
Right. Now, all this detailed diligence and so on, we can do as a sophisticated investor or an institutional investor who is backed by resources, capital and so on. But a normal guy who goes to buy out property, what can he do? A few things before he even thinks about buying something. Are there some things he can just look at? Just a few things, just tick the boxes. For example, he could look at completed stuff. That's one way to make sure that it's fine. But other than that, can he do something at the registrar's office or on a very short check himself?
So now, thankfully, in many jurisdictions, records are getting digitized.
Right.
For example, in Karnataka, you have the Kaveri platform,
Yeah.
which allows any person to log in, create a user ID, and check for registered transactions vis-a-vis a particular property.
And how would you search for this property? Through a survey number or?
So you can do it through a survey number. You can do the search using the person's name.
Right.
You can do the search based on boundaries.
Okay.
So there are different combinations that are available.
Okay.
So long as you know the location of the property. So that is one check that anybody can do, and this is pretty easy because anybody with a computer is able to do
Okay, so they can just log into Kaveri and check details of that. Like if you're buying something in a Shobha project, you can just type in the name of that project and look at all the details.
That's right.
Right.
So the other thing that they could do is they can, like I said, most court records are now digitized.
Right.
You have your online access to your high court records. You have online access to your civil court records. There also, based on the name of the person that you would be dealing with, you could do a check to see if there are any litigations.
Right.
So these are two checks that any common person could immediately do.
Right.
Again, before maybe going full-fledged into a transaction, some of the checks even you as an investor you look at whether the building has an OC.
Yeah.
You look whether the last sale deed is in the name of the current person you're transacting with. You check if the latest revenue or municipal record recognizes him as the owner.
Right.
These three checks you invariably do even as an investor.
Right. So if you're just buying property in Bangalore today, the questions you could ask the seller is, show me the Khata certificate because I want to see whether you are the owner. Show me the occupancy certificate of this building, and show me the encumbrance certificate, like you said, just to see whether it's encumbered by anyone else. So these 2-3 questions you're saying is something that people can ask
at the threshold, so that we know we are dealing with the right people.
Right. Okay, got it. And then just finally, in terms of digitization, I know you've spoken a little bit about this, but in the West we have blockchain, which is playing like a big part in digitizing land records. And a lot of the countries are doing this. Dubai, I know, for example, is like putting all of its land records on the blockchain. Hyderabad has been trying to do it. What do you think is the trend going forward for title diligences, land records, digitization? What do you see will happen over the next 4-5 years, and what will happen over the next, let's say, 10-15 years?
Sure. See, in India, this has actually started in 2008.
Right.
When the whole national land record digitization program was floated.
Okay.
Since then, different states, again, land as far as India is concerned is a state subject, like you rightly mentioned. So we need to look at every state needs to be incentivized.
Right.
There were states that took this mandate up way back in 2008. One of the front runners is Maharashtra.
Right.
So in Mumbai, for example, you had city survey records which were available way back in 2008-9 onwards.
I see.
Online. But now the government has again given an impetus. Now they have launched the new program, which is the Digital Land Records Program O2.
And this is the central government?
This is the central government. So again, while the program has been promulgated by the central government, there's a lot of buy-in required by the state governments because land remains a state subject.
Right.
Thankfully, Karnataka is doing a good job on that.
Okay.
There's a lot of digitization that is currently happening in Karnataka.
Okay.
Land revenue records are available online.
Okay.
You would have heard that the minister has currently announced that by next year this time, you will have vertical property cards available in the city.
What does that mean, vertical property cards?
So property cards is essentially something that the corporation is going to issue recognizing the unit and the ownership to that unit.
Right.
So that essentially helps you establish your title to some extent.
Okay.
So that is actually going to be a big leap in terms of identifying who the right
It's like an ID card. Like here is my, this is, I own this property.
So it's like your Khata certificate.
Right.
Currently you have your Khata certificate, but your property card will essentially also give a further stamp from the government to say that these have been verified.
Right.
So all of these things are happening in the background.
Okay.
And I believe that all of this is happening with a view to ultimately guarantee title by the state. Because once you would have seen last month the government rolled out a very large tender to two companies for doing a drone survey in relation to the whole state of Karnataka.
Right.
So they are going to map the entire thing through drone survey.
Right.
And the last survey in Karnataka, I think, was done way back in 1935 by the British government.
Right.
So since then, nobody has actually taken up that kind of a massive exercise.
Okay.
So once these surveys are done, they are verified with the current surveys. Land records get updated. Now registration also in Karnataka, it is becoming online. So unless all these records are updated and reflective of the current owners, you're not even able to register transactions. So that also puts an impetus on the relevant owners of property to ensure that their records are up to date.
Right.
So all of this is going towards the ultimate end game of the state ultimately guaranteeing title.
Which is what we spoke about at the beginning.
Yes.
The torrent system.
The torrent system. Okay. So in fact in India there was a land titling bill also promulgated way back in 2008.
Okay.
But like I said, the center can only promulgate it. It needs to be adopted by the state governments.
Right.
And you can't blame the state governments also for not adopting it because there's a lot of groundwork that needs to happen.
Right.
It is not just a question of just getting these land records digitized, etc. That will solve the problem as far as India is concerned, because we are a diverse country with different ethnicities, different religious practices. Right. There are personal laws involved. There's a whole debate that is going on around uniform civil code.
Of course.
But in my mind, that is also one of the steps that will go forward to ensure that these land title systems become organized.
Right.
Because if every individual is going to follow different laws of succession, some may be documented, some may not be documented, they will have their own personal practices that they adopt. Right. Then how do we document this? So there has to be some uniformity.
Right.
Again, it's a long way before this really comes to fruition, but already the works are. Things are already in the works to get it done.
So digitization is what's going to happen next, which is basically all the records as and when they happen, they're going to put it up onto this database, and what they had in the past, they are slowly going to scan them in the system. And I think quite a bit has happened over the last 5-10 years, because otherwise startups like CRE Matrix, whom we had here, Abhishek, the CEO, PropStack and a couple of others, they wouldn't have those databases unless all the documentation
so in fact
was
in Karnataka, from 2004 onwards, all registered transactions are currently already available.
Okay.
So we already have completed that much of backlog.
Right.
So gradually the government needs to complete the balance as well.
Okay.
It's a gradual process.
Right.
But it is happening.
It is going to happen. If I buy anything which is after 2004, I would already have all the records of how many ever transfers took place in that property in the last 19 odd years. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Mridul. I mean, I learned a lot from this conversation. We've done very big deals and smaller deals as well. But I think the quantity of work, the quality of work that we do on every asset is the same.
Is always been the same.
So it's not, you can't just say that it's only a 10 crore asset and therefore I don't need to do that much diligence versus a 10,000 crore asset.
I think you have always been very clear about that.
Yeah. So that's something that we've really focused on from the very beginning, and I think you've done almost all our diligences, at least here, in all, whether you were at CAM earlier or now at Trilegal, and we've profited from that to a great extent, including our investors, who we give access to, obviously, to all your title reports, which have been very independent and unbiased in that regard. So thank you so much for helping us in those deals, and obviously we keep working together going forward, and also for coming here today and explaining it in simple terms. I mean, legal jargon can sometimes be quite difficult to understand for a lay investor, and that's one of the things that we are trying to promote here, to make sure that people understand what they are getting into and why you do diligences. Because sometimes people ask, why is it taking so much time? I mean, we agreed to buy this property 3 months ago. Why are you still waiting? But the fact of the matter is that it's something that is very, very important. So we do focus on that.
Actually, one thing I would like to add here is something that we changed based on your instructions also, in terms of our approach to preparing title reports, so that it's more friendly for your investors. We always provided the conclusions upfront.
Yes.
And you also provided a pictorial representation of how these titles have flown. Again, something feedback that we received from you.
Right.
We've now started practicing that.
Oh, that's great.
Which is a learning for us as well.
That's a good thing. I mean, I think just telling them upfront that these are the issues and this is what because otherwise the history and so on can be quite difficult for someone to understand. Great. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us in this episode of the podcast. And I hope you learned from Mridul as much as I did on title and legal diligences, how that work, and why we pay so much attention to this particular aspect of deal making. And please do join us in the future with another guest, where we hope to speak to you about something else related to real estate investing, which you will hopefully be able to relate to. Thank you so much.